Monera, tout soif. Hello, everyone. Let's start healing. I'm Adrienne Murchison. Thank you for returning to our Let's Start Healing podcast. I just greeted you with a little Cape Verdean Creole. It is a mix of Portuguese and African languages. I said, "Hi, how are you? Monera, tout soif." Yes, we have more in common than we think, and what we have in common can change the world. So let's start healing. As we spread this love, I want to ask you to like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, visit our YouTube channel, which is the Let's Start Healing podcast on YouTube. That's where you can listen to all of our episodes, and you can also listen on Apple Podcasts. I would be willing to bet that a good number of you listening have researched your ancestry. It's been a pretty hot thing to do in the last few years. And in fact, my niece and I have done the same thing. It's something we do off and on. My niece Tanya is a true detective when it comes to researching our ancestry, and I come along for the ride and help out as much as I can, but it's a big passion for her. And I'm thinking about this because I think about the spiritual connection that we have with our family members often. And of course, it's not every single family member, but I have felt the power of a spiritual connection with members of my family, and it just fascinates me. And I want to understand more. And I bring this up for a couple of reasons. One is about 2 years ago when Tanya and I were researching family, I met our current guest, Cheryl Phillips. And I met her at a family reunion where in South Carolina, where when I went, there was only one family member that I knew there, who I was meeting there. And then I met a whole bunch of other family. And so I think about, as I said, the power and the spiritual connection with family. Several years ago, I was living in New York, and an aunt was living in Texas, and she was in the last days of her life. And she was an aunt that I hadn't seen in years, but was definitely around when I was growing up, and someone that I loved so dearly. And I remember talking to her on the phone a day or two before she was to pass, and there was an awareness that she was going to go soon, and that was surreal. And then the actual day that she passed, I had talked to my mother on the phone, who informed me that they expected her to go. The family members, her children, expected her to go shortly. And I remember having to go to the ladies' room and just go in a stall and to be alone and just feel what I was feeling, just allow myself the space and the alone time to feel what I was feeling. And it was something that was more than the sadness that you feel when someone you love is dying. I mean, it was some kind of surreal, spiritual power, connection that I was feeling. And at that time, I had a boyfriend who was estranged from his parents. And as I'm feeling these feelings about my aunt and this power, the power of this connection with my aunt across the miles, I remember wanting to communicate somehow to my boyfriend that this thing is real. At the time in my mind, I was characterizing it as blood. Like this family blood is real. I remember wanting to say to him, but it's something that was more than that. I was limited as I am now by my words, but it was something more than that, and I didn't want him to take for granted or. Not that he was belittling, but I didn't want him to minimize in any way the power of connection of family as he was making a choice to not be connected to his parents. And so I say all of that to say that these are things that I ponder as I think about God and think about what things mean. And I'm enjoying getting to know Cheryl. As I said, we met in recent years, and you're going to find her very interesting. She is a very wise woman with an interesting, fascinating connection to God, and the way that God talks to her is something that is deep. It's very deep, and she has a wonderful story to share about a miracle, a blessing that took place in her family years ago. So let's meet her. Let's get started and let's start healing. Welcome, Cheryl.
Hello.
I'm so happy to have you here.
Thank you for having me here. I'm really appreciative of this situation because I know dialogue is everything.
It certainly is, and I'm excited for our listeners to get to know you. I enjoy talking to you because we both have a love of God and we approach it in different ways. And I want to show how two people, this is exactly what this podcast is all about, how we all have something in common. This common love of God, we can talk about it from different perspectives and different experiences and in a beautiful way and feel the Spirit of God. And I want to talk about your book, Lessons in the Storm, that you are writing, and I am helping you with the editing part of it. And before we get there, share with our listeners a little bit about you. You live in Decatur.
Yes, I do. I live in Decatur. I'm from Western Massachusetts. I love the fact of life. I love the quality of life. I thank God for the ability to be able to travel around the world, to travel throughout the states, to be able to see the different perspective of people, to understand that life is not about living on an island, it's about living together in peace.
That's so beautiful and so true. So tell me about your spiritual path and your relationship with God growing up. Did you grow up in a traditional religion, going to church every Sunday? What was it like for you?
I had the pleasure of being raised by a wonderful woman of God who knew that it was my journey to seek God the way I wanted to. So my mother was a pastor's child.
Really?
And based on being a pastor's child, she was able to understand different perspectives of how people brought in religion, thought about religion. And my mother was quite different than anybody else. She was probably a woman far beyond her years and time. She felt that it was not the responsibility of her to innate in us God, that God's in us already, and all she had to do was speak. And the God in us would speak out. So my mother allowed us to have the ability of being in a Christian family, but to be able to understand other religions. So Jehovah's Witnesses, Seventh-day Adventists, all the different types of religions out there, even the Jewish religion. So based on that factor, even though her foundation is based on Jesus, she knew that if she allow us to seek our own journey in God and be able to demonstrate in her living Jesus, that Jesus will be where we will go.
So did you go to church each Sunday growing up, or what was the practice in your family?
We went to church every Sunday. We studied the Word of God in the house.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And we watch our mother more display what religion was rather than say what religion was. So it wasn't a situation that we were studying the traditional way of people studying.
Mm-hmm.
We were practicing how we want to live in her house and live our lives. And what was important is not to have a personality, because a personality is okay, but to really have character. Mm-hmm. And to understand what character is. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. There are plenty of people in this world today that have the greatest personality and lack character.
So true, so true. So what tell me about your relationship with God and your earliest experience of having a relationship with God, because I know that you're very close to him and you have a really deep-rooted faith. So talk about that. Do you remember your first awareness, like truly conscious awareness of God within your spirit?
I think the earliest I could remember is approximately around 6 or 7. Mm-hmm. I lived in Springfield, Massachusetts, and down the street, I lived in the Upper Hill neighborhood, and down the street from my home was a newspaper location where they would bring different newspaper paper boys and things. They would meet there to gather their papers. And I remember going to bed one night, and what I thought was a dream was really reality. I was praying feverishly about saving someone's life in that paper location. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't understand, and I didn't know the person or anything. And I remember praying and feeling the presence of God. And at that time point, I didn't realize it, and I thought it was a dream. I woke up the next morning, and there was a situation in the newspaper where someone almost got killed in there, and something saved them. They couldn't determine who or what.
No kidding.
And at that time point, I realized God was speaking to me.
Wow.
Yes. So what was really something is periodically throughout my life, I knew God was speaking to me on several things. Mm-hmm. But I thought it was awkward. I thought it was weird. I didn't want to accept it because I didn't want to be different than everybody else. Mm-hmm. But as I grew and my relationship got stronger, I embraced it. I thank God for it. And as my oldest daughter, Jocelyn, says to me all the time, she doesn't know anyone that can hear God better than me.
You know, I think it's so interesting that God can speak to all of us in different ways. One thing that I've come to understand is that he speaks to us at the level that we can understand him. And so we each have these different gifts, I believe. And some of us, I know the gifts that I have, I didn't really accept my gifts in the very beginning. You know, I have some intuitive gifts, and it used to really bother me. And I was probably an adult, well into adulthood, definitely, before I started accepting and saying, okay, this is the way it is, and just going with the flow. So it's interesting. That's very powerful, what you just described. It's interesting how it took you a while too, and you embraced it.
I think that there is not one person on earth that doesn't have a gift that God gave them to recognize them and hear them. It is the ability to accept it, embrace it, and want to go with it.
Exactly. And not place our egos in it to try to determine what it means. Right. Because I think I did that as far as, well, what does it mean? Does it mean this? Does it mean that? You know, and it's just go with it. Like you said. So what is your, talk about your relationship with God now, beyond what you just told us?
So my present relationship with God is always going to be open and still learning and thirsting for the learning of where I am and what my purpose is and how do I fit in, and understand also where I don't fit in.
Can you talk about that a little bit? Like fit in what way, not fit in another?
Well, here are some of the things that we realize in life, okay? Sometimes in life, people don't understand the first level of betrayal is from within. Not recognizing what is meant for you to be in and to what level you're supposed to be in a relationship, be it be a family relationship, a relationship with a spouse or a potential spouse, or a relationship with a job, or a relationship with your friends. Sometimes we introduce people into our lives that really don't belong that close.
That's true. Because maybe you don't resonate with each other.
And maybe you're interfering where the goals that God has for them.
Interfering with the goals that God has for them?
Yes, because sometimes what happens is some people are, some situations and people can be a distraction in your life.
Right.
And you don't recognize them as a distraction. And then what happens is when something is a distraction, it can lessen the purpose you have in life. I always tell my little sister Precious that, a circle can fit in a square as long as the circle deflates to get into square. And sometimes we deflate.
That's so well put.
To go into a square. And we don't fit there.
That's so true.
And then what happens is those openings that's in there open the door for more betrayal to our own peace, our own self, our own understanding of who we are and who we were designed by God to be. So each and every day I learn, just because someone has a great personality, just because I like being around them, does not mean they have the opportunity to be a distraction in my life, to stop me from going where God wants me to go, to be the best I can be.
That is so, so true. So talk about how God speaks to you, because sometimes beyond what you just told us a few minutes ago about your dream, because I'll be talking to you and you'll say, well, God told me this, and, it's no question about it. So how does God tell you one thing or the other? How does he speak to you? Is it in a voice in your head, a voice that you hear within your spirit? It's an instinct. How does God speak to you?
Well, God speaks to people in various ways.
How does he speak to you?
And when he speaks to me, he speaks to me in various ways.
Okay.
So what I might not be even thinking about something. I might not even be in a conversation. And all of a sudden, my spirit will say this. Or it will say, look at this, realize this, pray for this. Because I am a person that believes that everything that's communicated doesn't have to be voice. So there are many ways to communicate to people what God tells you. And it's being able to hear the distinct way he wants you at that time to penetrate that voice, that communication level.
You know what I love about hearing you talk is how open you are. Because I know through my own experience, the more open I am, the more I hear God. The more willing I am, the more I hear clearly. And so I can tell that you are completely wide open. You're completely open to God. So you hear him loud and clear.
Well, if you look at any religion, it tells you that God made everyone and everything. God is not a failure in any way. He designed us with the idea of success.
Right.
And so And when everything was done, he said it was all good.
Yes.
Perfectly good. Exceptionally good, he describing it. And so what you realize is that everything is open for you to understand where God fits in there, why he chose it.
Yes.
And I found more of my answers came by asking questions rather than seeking to get the answers. And so in order to ask questions, everything has to be an open-end question to reveal what's going on and its purpose. And that's one of the reasons why I wrote my book, Lessons in Living, because I wanted people to know that in a lot of my questions, God, why me? God, what's this going on? What's going on here? What am I supposed to seek from this? What am I supposed to do with this? Those questions came all these answers. And that those answers and those questions are something that each and every one of us live. And that we need to realize that it's not the people you need to be concerned with, it's your relationship with God. And the closer you get to God and the stronger you have faith in God and the journey he's brought you on, there lies the victory.
I think that something that it's natural to feel or think, and I don't think this way, but I think I probably did at one point in time, is to think, oh, well, God wants me to go through hardship, and I think what you just said for me, it's what I believe. I don't know if this is the meaning underlying what you just said, but for me, it's that God, whatever I really want in my heart, if it's for good and for love, then God wants that for me. And so I don't have to go through hardship to get to that thing, to get to that place. I do believe I'm here to serve. I think that's a part of my and our existence. But I think that there's something that we think, oh, God wants me to be poor, or God wants me to go without. I think that's a human thing that we have when it comes to the words you just said, rather than allowing the words you just said to mean we're perfect and whatever we want within our heart that's for good and for love is ours.
I think that what we have to understand is that God originally had everyone come here. Adam and Eve, if we look at that level, came here with a free choice. They weren't dictated or told, if you do it, this is going to be damnation. And I think sometimes in religion that we get so far to the left or right that we don't understand that there is this gray area where God accepts us. He knows who we are. He knows where we're going to go. There's nothing that's a surprise to him. And then he understands how to make our life walk back on the perfect path. Some people, the only way they learn lessons is to have self-destruction. And some people, they learn lessons easily. It's like a raindrop. It's like sometimes you ever met a person that said, it's raining and no one sees nothing, but they felt that one drop. And that one drop opens the door for them to go on the right path and do the right things. There are some people that have to be in a storm. And some people are in a storm, not necessarily for themselves, but to encourage those who are in a storm how to get out of a storm. And that's what my book talks about. It talks about the lessons you learn in a storm. Sometimes storms are going on all around us all the time, but it doesn't mean that every storm has to be destructive or that it has to destroy the inner part of who we are. We have storms in the weather all the time. One area, you could be in Decatur, Georgia, and right there, someone on one street may be going through all kinds of tornado problems, and just 5 miles down the road, nothing. But we're all in a storm. We just don't understand it.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And it's how you embrace the storm and prepare for the storm, and where your faith is during the storm.
And so for your book, is it titled Lessons in the Storm or Lessons in Living?
It's Lessons in the Storm.
Lessons in the Storm. So the wisdom that you have now came through lessons that you learned in the storm.
The wisdom I have now is multifaceted. And I can say this because, as a older woman once told me, there's not enough days to experience everything in your life. So you need to take the experience of somebody else and watch it and grow from it and understand that God delivered that message for you so that you can avoid certain things and that you could go to a higher level and elevate your life, because every lesson doesn't need to be a individual lesson.
Right. Well, so can you share something from personal experience that you did learn through a lesson or a trial or even through a joyous time, just something that God revealed to you that maybe you share in your book?
Well, in the early part of my book, I tell you about how people go through storms and they don't even realize they're going through storms. And that some storms look very familiar to you. And being comfortable about something being familiar could be a downtrodden situation in your life. Because sometimes thinking that you recognize something as being a certain way, you become very comfortable to the point where you don't realize there's danger. Or sometimes you don't realize there's an opening.
Right.
Or you don't realize that this is not going to always be this way.
Right.
That when you're in a storm, sometimes you tend to forget that some of this could be a distraction in your life, and that you need to have faith to know that God is with you every step of the way, and to hold on to him tightly, especially when you don't understand what's going on. Because a lot of times when you think you understand what's going on, you get comfortable and say, oh, well, the next step's going to be this. And then when you get surprised, or it doesn't come as quickly as you think it is, or you don't see the things you need to see to give you that warm, fuzzy feeling inside, or you're wearing those rose-colored glasses that tell you, oh, it's not as bad as it looks. Those things help you to grow, but they also can delay your progress.
Yes, you have me thinking of a prayer I should say every day, but I do try to say it often in the beginning of the day, is today I will make no decisions by myself, because when I do, I can go off on all kinds of different routes. So is there a personal experience that you can share that relates to what you just described, something that you're willing to or comfortable sharing?
Let's see. I'll talk about the experience of growing up with this beautiful mother of mine who had 4 children already. And all of a sudden, and she had a disease called sarcoidosis, which is a autoimmune disease that affects the major organs in your body, and the body starts to attack those major organs. And when she found out she had this disease, she went to all kinds of doctors. She had medical insurance and everything else that afforded her the best doctors. But the doctor that knew what she had was what we call a welfare doctor. And that was a doctor that you stood in line. He never took appointments. You had to go in a line and pick a number, and he would see you by number. And he was the one that told her she had sarcoidosis and confirmed it.
Mm-hmm.
So that lets you understand that in the most unrecognizable places may be your...
Because she had gone to all different types of doctors.
Yes, because she had a cold that looked like it was never going away.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, none of these doctors had ever seen it or experienced it,
Mm-hmm.
never knew what this disease was. So you can't recognize or even phantom anything that you've never seen before. Mm-hmm. And so here it is. My mother gets up there and she goes to these doctors, and the one that shouldn't find it is the one that finds it. So once she had that disease, I saw my mother being sick at age 28, all the way till she died at 49. Mm. And so she would be in and out of the hospital, but my mother didn't let nothing stop her from living. My mother was very much an outdoors person. If you didn't know any better, I would say you would think she wasn't sick because she was very active mm-hmm. and active with us. She wanted us to be outdoors people. We went and did everything that a healthy mother would do with their kids outdoors.
Was it the last year or a couple of years when she was not able to do that so much, or how was the last couple of years of her life or final months of her life?
My mother went all the way to the end of her life being outdoors mm-hmm. and enjoying it, even with her grandson, Keith Jr.
How old were you when she passed away?
I was 31 years old. And here's the situation, okay? During that time point, my mother showed me who Jesus was. She showed me how her faith is. She loves 2 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 10, and one of the things that she would do is she would get up there and realize that she wasn't alone during her whole time period. So there was a time point where my mother had to make a decision because she ended up being pregnant with her 5th pregnancy. And at that time point, she had to make a decision if she was going to have this baby with a possibility, as the doctors told her, she would die. She was going to die and the baby would die. And since she already had 4 children, it didn't make any sense to leave these 4 children, at the time I was 15 years old, these 4 children without their mother. Who's going to take care of them? But my mother's faith said, pray and ask God. Mm-hmm. And my mother heard God say, have the baby. Everyone told her to have an abortion. And my mother, knowing how sick she was, went on with the pregnancy. Well, based on that pregnancy, what happened was the very next day after making that decision, she went into congestive heart failure and had to be put on life support.
No kidding. This isn't when this is after she decided, like she decided she was going to go ahead with the pregnancy, and then this happened the next day?
The next day.
Okay.
So here's the decision. Mm-hmm. I trust you, God. Mm-hmm. I'm going to go where you say. I know Jesus is part of my life, and I'm going to have this baby. I trust you more than I trust myself. So she gets up there, make that decision. She goes to the doctor's office for a regular visit. When she goes to that visit, she doesn't come home. Mm. She goes straight to the hospital and she's put on life support. She was on life support for 7 months. That's 7 months of me not being with my mother.
You are joking me.
I lie to you not.
Go on.
So here it is. Every day I'm saying, Lord, Jesus, you told me everything will be okay. I never thought about what was my mother going through, knowing that she made a decision that didn't look like it was the right decision. Because now she's away from her 4 kids for 7 months. This is my first year of going into high school, and I'm not with my mother. I'm separated from my brothers because not everybody wants to take care of 4 children. So it's me and my sister one place, my brothers another place. That meant for 7 months, I didn't see my brothers. So in this situation, in this journey, I question, God, why us? What is it that you're trying to show? I knew my mother knew God very well.
And she's unconscious?
No, my mother is fully conscious during this whole time on life support. So it's not like, oh, she's, unconscious.
But she can't talk to you, can she?
Because
she's on life support, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not. There's no way of communicating with us or anything.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And there's no way of us going into the hospital. Okay.
Yeah.
And so here's these situations that we're faced with, and this is reality.
Mm-hmm.
But see, God's in the Bible. All you see is alternative to facts.
Mm-hmm.
The fact is, she should have died. The fact is, when she made that decision, it was not a decision that sounded logical or reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
Why save one child when you have 4 left?
So continue and tell us what happened.
And so those 7 months, I'm praying and I'm trying to figure out the situation. There are time points where I'm angry. I'm even expressing my anger to God. But then all of a sudden, he gives me a peace and he tells me, Cheryl, take care of your sister. You're going to have a little sister. And so here it is. One day I'm in high school and I go to, at the time I went to High School of Commerce. And there was a principal that I will never forget, Philip Sweeney. Mm-hmm. And he makes an announcement over the intercom. Mm-hmm. We want to congratulate Cheryl because Cheryl Murchison had a little sister today. Well, really, my sister was born on Sunday, and that Monday was the announcement. And to see where my sister is, to see what my mother had put in her, the God in her, the peace in her, the strength in her, and the rest of us too. And to see that, there are time points in life where you see people say that they have children and they'll say, if you get 50% of your children to do well, you did well. Mm-hmm. My mother got 100%.
So back up a little bit.
Okay.
Back up a little bit. Our listeners should know that your tears are rolling down your cheeks.
It's tears of happiness.
Yes, yes. So, your mother gave birth at 9 months, at 8 months, or 7 months? At what point?
My sister was born full term.
Okay.
Fully healthy.
Okay. Was your mom still on life support when she was born, or had she been able to come off life support and come out of the hospital, or what was going on with your mother's condition at that time?
Well, I like to say this is a witness of God's hand suddenly. Mm-hmm. At the same time that my sister was born, my mother went off life support.
What?
My mother didn't go off of life support until my sister was delivered.
No kidding.
So miraculously,
mm-hmm.
she was able to deliver this baby, full term, healthy, and restore her own health at the same time.
And tell everyone what your sister's name is.
My sister's name is Precious. And Precious, if anyone wants to see a precious gift, mm-hmm. a miraculous story, Go on the website and look up Precious Murchison Gittens, like kittens, but with a G, and you'll see that God designed her with a purpose, and she's flying high with it. And that my mother investment and her faith was successful and was true, and that God can do anything and all things. All he needs you to do is relax and trust him.
And so what did your mom talk to you about at that time and, through the years about that whole experience? What did she share about, how what she had been through and how she had prayed, and then here she is on life support, and how she felt during that time? What did she share about that whole thing?
My mother shared with me that life is about understanding how important you are to God. And what people do is get so caught up into how important they're into people. And if you understand how important you are to God, and that we all serve a purpose in our living, and that we leave legacies behind to people that will never be forgotten, that we are all living creatures of the Bible, that our life displays it. And to trust God. And that there are times that there comes fear where you don't understand what's going on. But as long as you don't try to make the answers, but ask the questions, you'll get the answer that will let you understand what it was all about.
So when you say, what did you say? Ask the questions. Repeat what you said, because I have a question behind that.
I said, ask the questions, not provide the answers. Because what people do is whenever something's going on in our lives, we point out the reasoning, what the answer is.
So we come up with the answer. Is that what you're saying?
We come up with our own answers.
Yes.
And the answers could be so far from the
Yes.
truth
Yes.
that it brings on fear. Not the fear of reverence, but the fear of anxiousness, anxiety, destruction, worry.
Do you kind of, when you talk about this, it has me thinking about my mindset, and I'm curious if this is what you mean, or if not, then share more. So for me, I try to not so much ask why is this happening? Why is this happening? I try not to do that anymore. And I have learned to ask, what is the thing for? And so then, in other words, what is the meaning of this? And so that will help me to know what I'm doing. What have I done to create this situation? And what is it that God would have me know or have me learn as a result of this situation I have found myself in? Is that what you mean?
Well, really, when I'm saying, a why, it's not as a victim level.
Right.
Never should it be a victim. What I am saying is it from a purpose of understanding what it's leading us to. The best analogy I can give to you is Oprah Winfrey wanted to be an anchor woman for the Atlanta newscast. Instead, Monica Kaufman got it. Oprah Winfrey went to Baltimore. She didn't understand that where she needed to serve and to get opening to where she was going to lead to, that would open the doors for her to have her own show, was in Baltimore. Because once she got to Baltimore, what looked like were failures were actually leading her to a path of success.
Exactly.
And so if she asked the question, why am I here? Where am I going? How do I serve while I'm here? If you ask more of those questions, you got the answer for each of those questions. And it led her where she ended up, before she went to Chicago, being on this Good Morning Baltimore show, which led her to go to Chicago. Reading also led her to being in the book where she got into play.
You mean the movie?
The movie,
A Color Purple.
The Color Purple.
Mm-hmm.
All these whys, where, those questions led her to the path to her answer.
Mm-hmm.
And the more comfortable you are at asking more of the questions, the more it leads you to success. Even in science, they don't come up with the answer. They ask the questions.
Mm-hmm.
And the question open and introduce all kinds of discoveries that end up answering our questions. And that's what God has taught me with my mother. That's what he's taught me with myself. Mm. That's what he's taught me watching other people, my children, my family members, friends, other people in life. That the journey is trying to find out the questions that will lead you to the answer.
I'm so loving talking to you, and I just love how you demonstrate how God loves all of us. And before we close, I want you to share what we were talking about offline when I was telling you how the spiritual discussion group that I go to on Sundays, how we, separate from the conversations that we have on Sunday morning, we have something we call higher conversations. And we had our last higher conversation was about Jesus. And I was telling you how the people who come to this group are from all different faiths. The morning group is for A Course in Miracles. And that's a book that is, it was channeled through a professor at Columbia University in the 1970s. And she was not a Christian, as far as I know, but Jesus spoke to her and said, this is A Course in Miracles, take notes. And basically what he said is a lot of what you have shared is presented in this book. And the people who come to this book, they're not necessarily Christians at all. In fact, they might have an aversion to Jesus, and because of how they grew up and the concept of Jesus, you know, how he was presented in their household. But they come to this book, and it's all about love, and it's amazing. And so when we had this higher conversation, it was incredible. It was about, I want to say maybe about 16 people. And we're just all sharing all these, how we grew up. If it was some people, like, as I said, had a negative idea of him. And no one was offended by anything anyone said, because it was just all in a spirit of love and understanding. And so I was sharing some of that with you beforehand, and then you were talking, I think, about the apostles and disciples, I think.
Well, we have to remember, especially if you're a Christian and you read the Bible shows you that Jesus had 12, really 13 disciples, because one of them got replaced, right? And one of them, Saul, who wrote most of the Bible, which is now called Paul, was totally against Jesus. But he wrote most of the Bible. Situation is simple. That was an understanding that there was 13 different perspectives of the same man. That's why you can go in the Bible and you can see the same story told, and you have one way of approaching it and another way to approach it. You can listen to someone that listened to Jesus, something just as basic as the Lord's Prayer.
Yes.
Matthew saw it one way. Luke might have saw it a different way. Mark might have seen it a different way. You look in the Bible and you will see the Lord's Prayer in there, not once, but at least twice. Mm-hmm. And it's said with a slight difference. Mm-hmm. Well, we are all God's people. We all were born to resonate who we are in God. our own personal relationship. And it's our perspective that we're trying to reach and touch. And once you identify with touching the road that God has directed for you and designated for you, and the more you ask why and when and what the purpose is, rather than acting in a victim way, the answers will be revealed to you how your search and your relationship with God will become flourish or diminish, because it's the energy you put in. And it's your responsibility to put the energy in. Mm-hmm. And if each and every one of us would just look at the God within us and speak to the God in someone else, perfect peace will be here.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. And I was thinking, just as you were talking about how all of this is about having a relationship with God. It is about engaging with God. And beautiful things come as a result of that.
Yes. And my relationship with God has brought beauty in the rain, beauty in the sun, mm-hmm. beauty in the storms. Mm-hmm. And I, as Maya Angelou used to say, I wouldn't give up nothing for this journey.
Well, on that we'll end. And thank you so much. We are going to talk again and share more about your book. So thank you so much, Cheryl.
Thank you. And thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. Remember to like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, visit the Let's Start Healing podcast channel on YouTube and Apple Podcasts. Send me that email at letstarthealingpodcast@gmail.com. Let's start healing.